أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين لعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Inshallah, today we will begin our fourth session in learning about and developing a relationship with Imam Mahdi alayhi salam. Before we begin with the material we want to talk about today, I want to go back and just review the previous session. We talked about the days and the times to remember Imam Mahdi. And the nature of our religious life is that we want to have a continuity, a constancy, a regularity in our remembrance and our religious practice. We have the 5 daily prayers that are spread out throughout the day to be kind of reminders interspersed throughout our day from when we wake up until we go to sleep about our duty to Allah, worship, gratitude, of seeking assistance. But that continuity is helped if we have certain periods where we focus and we give greater attention. So that raises our level of awareness, and then it helps our baseline also become stronger. And so those key times are Thursday and Friday, in particular Thursday night, meaning the eve of Friday, because remember, Islamically, the day begins at sunset. So Friday is from sunset on Thursday through the day of Friday until sunset on Friday. There are special times during the day. Sahar is the last 1/3 of the night. And that is a very important time for dua, for recitation of Quran. And if we're not able to do that regularly, then if possible, on Friday, meaning that night between Thursday and Friday, the last third of the night, which is Sahar time, that has a special importance. And then dawn, which is from the beginning of Fajr time until sunrise. The morning on Friday, and then that last hour or few hours in the afternoon of Friday, that's when the opportunity is passing. And that is a very important time for dua, as we saw in the hadith of Fatima Zahra alayhi salam. So that's a review about times and places to remember Imam Mahdi. Now we come to our next area of focus, which is to look at the way in which we should remember Imam Mahdi, the etiquette and the adab, or the characteristics of our dua. And we're going to focus on a number of different areas. These are reminders of how to do dua in general. They're not all exclusive to praying for Imam Mahdi. But among the duas that we do, among the most important and the most significant is our prayer for Imam Mahdi. And so for that reason, we should learn these mannerisms, these etiquette of dua, and apply them to the best of our ability, in particular when we are making our most important prayers. Now, sometimes when we talk about these different, uh, not requirements, but recommendations, it can be a little bit overwhelming. We might think that, all right, then if I don't have wudu and I'm not facing Qibla and I don't have that full presence of mind and I'm not able to remember or to do all of these things, then it's not really a dua. And this is actually true of people's prayer as well. So there are some of us who do a rough and ready prayer. We kind of just do what is wajib. And there are others of us that do a very beautiful prayer. They will do the adhan, and then they will do dua after adhan, and then they will do iqamah, and they will do dua after iqamah, and then they will pray with presence of mind, and they will give their ruku' and their sujood its due, and they will give the qunut its due, and then they will complete the prayer and they will do ta'qibat, tasbih, recitation of Quran, dua, sajdat al-shukr. They will do their nawafil. And so their prayer is a much more involved and a much more beautiful and a much more rewarding experience. But the risk is that somebody who is habituated to that kind of a prayer, if they are in a rush, then they might sometimes feel like, let me kind of delay my prayer in order to be able to do it right. And what happens is sometimes that means the prayer is done outside of the time of fadilah. So in general, it's better to do that beautiful prayer than a rough and ready prayer. But it's better to do a rough and ready prayer in the time of fadilah than to delay it beyond that time. So remember that there is an ideal that we have when we are able to do it. If I am home, I have the time, then I try to do as much of what is recommended as possible. But if I am at the train station, or I'm at the airport, or I'm at work and I happen to work in an environment where the only place that I can pray is a closet or an empty conference room, that might get used at any moment. And it's not possible for me to do all of those recommended acts. Well, then it's better for me to do what I can and to do the prayer within the time of fadilah. Same thing is here. We learn these adab so we can apply them to the extent possible. But it might be the case that many of our du'as will only be with some of these recommended acts. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Don't let wanting to do it in the best possible way make you only pray occasionally rather than frequently. So what are those recommended acts? One is to have consistency and to never get tired of praying for Imam Mahdi. And this has been expressed in a large number of ahadith. We have the instruction that أكثر الدعاء بتعجيل الفرج. Frequently pray for the hastening of the deliverance of God. And as we've said, the deliverance of God is a comprehensive concept. It means that God will deliver you from evil, from ignorance, from your worries, and from your concerns. So every time I am sick and I get cured, that is a deliverance. Every time I am in debt and I'm able to pay off that debt, that is a deliverance. Every time I have a stressful obligation, a test that I need to take, an interview that I need to give, a presentation that I need to succeed in, a sale that I need to make, every time that God assists me in accomplishing a task, that is a faraj that He has given me. But these are all small instances. And the greatest faraj that God will give us and humanity is not for me to get something that I want, but it is for God to alleviate the suffering and the deprivation of all of humanity from the leadership and the guidance of the Imam appointed from the progeny of the Prophet, Imam Mahdi alayhi salam. So when we say al-Faraj, what we are referring to is that which gathers together all of those small things that we need and we want, we ask for and we receive from Allah. It includes all of those things because my health, my freedom from debt, my having the material resources that I need that will help me serve the cause of Ahlul Bayt, that will help bring me closer to the goal that I have to be a worshipper and a servant of Allah. But I should never think that they are what I actually need. What I actually need is all of those small things I ask for as a means to serve Allah. And when we remember that they are a means, then they don't become a distraction. So sometimes we might feel, well, if I sacrifice my time or if I give a contribution or a donation or I pay my religious obligations, then I am losing my time. I'm losing my capital. I am giving up something. If I realize that those are a means, then when I have an obligation given to me by God, I will think, all right, this is exactly what I was earning that money for. This is exactly what I was asking for that health for. So Faraj refers to God's deliverance. And the deliverance that covers all of our needs is for God to honor and to fulfill his promise to Imam Mahdi. Everything else is also important, but it's important as a means to that faraj. So, what do we get as a conclusion? Frequently pray for that which collects and incorporates all of our individual needs. And when you pray for any individual need, make it explicit in your intention and in your words that this is for the sake of God, that it is in order for this small deliverance that I am asking from Allah to be a means for me to serve God. In other words, I want to ask for a raise. I want to try to make a sale. So I ask for that small haja. Oh Allah, give it to me so that I am in a stronger position to serve your path, to serve the Imam of my time. Because the more resources that you are able to have, the more help you are able to marshal in the cause of Imam Mahdi. So that should be continuous. One is by praying for Imam Mahdi himself. The other is by including the intention that everything else that you're praying for is also a prayer for Imam Mahdi. Because you don't want health just for health. You don't want wealth just to get rich for bragging rights or for other reasons. You don't want to have a family to get married, to have children, to have your children triumph and succeed just for the sake of an emotional connection or for any other reason, but that this is your prayer for Imam Mahdi. So do you see how that helps us pray frequently? One is the actual explicit prayer for Imam Mahdi himself, and the other is that every other prayer you make is also a prayer for Imam Mahdi, because you are praying for the resources that are going to help you and others serve Imam Mahdi. And in that way, none of your prayers is anything but a prayer for Imam Mahdi. And that will bring not just a constancy to our du'as, but it will also bring a depth to our du'as, a unity of purpose into our lives. We're not going to feel like we have so many different directions that we are trying to work in or that we are being pulled towards, but we have a single goal in a single direction. The second element of dua is that we have to maintain taqwa. The Quran says, إِنَّمَا يَتَقَبَّلُ اللَّهُ مِنَ الْمُتَّقِينَ. Allah only accepts from the pious. So sometimes we think that we get a license to be neglectful because we do something that is good. We do extra credit and we think that that gives us license to ignore the homework or the obligation. But the reality is that whatever we do, whatever extra credit we may do, whatever good we may do, it is only acceptable to Allah if we are pious. إِنَّمَا يَتَقَبَّلُ اللَّهُ مِنَ الْمُتَّقِينَ. If we are not pious, we don't abstain from what Allah prohibits, we don't do what He has obligated, then the extra dua, the extra good deeds that I may want to do, it doesn't have a benefit. It doesn't give me any closeness to God. So piety refers to a general piety of not doing sins, avoiding what is prohibited, doing what is obligatory. But the second part of piety is that when you pray for Imam Mahdi, also do that with piety, meaning do it seeking nearness from Allah. It's not to defeat your enemies. It's not to be on the winning team. It's not for your revenge or vengeance in your personal capacity that I have somebody that I don't like. But it is for vengeance against the enemies of God, the enemies of Ahlul Bayt. Both the love of Ahlul Bayt and the hatred and disassociation from the enemies of Ahlul Bayt, it should be for the sake of God and not for my sake. I don't have any personal enemies. And when I pray for Imam Mahdi, then there is a piety not just in my general life, but in that very act of praying, which is that I pray for him for his sake, for the accomplishment of his purpose. Not, sometimes there's volunteers, workers, they work for a candidate, and they may have joined the candidate because they believe in their platform that they're advocating for in politics. But then at some point, they also start to look at, well, if my candidate wins, then maybe I'll be an advisor. Maybe, I'll get a leg up in my career. Maybe either they'll appoint me or they'll give me a reference, and then once they're elected and they're in power, people will give importance to their reference. And so it's sometimes imperceptible where that person is a volunteer inspired by a platform, and when they become a self-interested political actor. You can see that very clearly sometimes in people who join a cause in sincerity, but then sort of have not maintained their intentions, and it changes. Maybe some of us have experienced that in our own lives. So when we serve Allah, when we serve Imam Mahdi, be very careful and conscious. Our general piety will help us maintain our sincerity in serving Imam Mahdi. But we also have to deliberately ensure that when we pray, he's not a candidate who's going to be elected to office, he is the serving official appointed by Allah already, but his office will go from being in concealment to being in public. When that happens, and now he is publicly in office, we don't want to be like that sincere volunteer who says, all right, my person has won, they are now in power, what can I get out of it? This is my time to cash in. And there are people who they are not conscious of their intention, and sometimes it changes over time. So piety is a factor that helps us maintain the purity of intention. When it comes to the prayers that we recite, before you start to think of praying in your own words, it's very important to give precedence and priority to the prayers of Ahlul Bayt. Because there is a place, as we will talk about in a moment, for your own prayers, but there is a greater importance to first training and refining our soul and our wants, our asks from Allah. In the prayers that we have from Ahlul Bayt, there is a direction for our life to rectify our beliefs, to prioritize different actions than we might normally think about in our mundane life. And there is a way of speaking and a way of thinking and a way of acting that we learn from dua. So we want to come to a point where we speak intimately with God. We speak intimately with the Imam of our time. But before we do that, we want to learn the adab, we want to learn the etiquette, how to speak, how to think, how to act from Ahlul Bayt themselves. So give precedence to those du'as that we have learned from Ahlul Bayt. And as we've said, I think in a previous session, that doesn't mean that we will exclusively look at du'as that have come from Ahlul Bayt or that have a very strong chain of narration. There are some du'as that are very beautiful, but their chain of narration is a little bit less certain. We don't have to ignore those du'as, but we value them insofar as they are in line with authentic ahadith and sayings and du'as that we have from Ahlul Bayt. So that is the standard from which everything else flows. We can even compose poetry, and beautiful poetry in praise of Ahlul Bayt is often inspired by Allah Himself. It is often something that is very effective in moving our hearts closer to Ahlul Bayt. But the standard by which we measure it is whether it is in accordance with the teachings that we have from the Prophet and from Ahlul Bayt. So give preference to the du'as of Ahlul Bayt, and then when you are reading the du'a, whether it be a du'a like du'a Kumayl or a du'a specifically for Imam Mahdi. Sometimes we have a habit, especially in our daily life, to kind of skim things. Don't skim the du'a, but move your lips and vocalize it. This is a requirement in prayer. Many people, they make that mistake where they will do the dhikr, but it's just kind of a thought. When you are praying, you have to say it. So you have to move your lips and vocalize the words. Subhana rabbiyal azim wa bihamdih. Subhana rabbiyal a'la wa bihamdih. And the same thing should be there in dua. And if possible, raise your voice so that it's not just vocalized with your mouth, but you can actually hear it with your ears. So you are involving more of your organs, more of your body in that dua. And the more of your body that you involve, the more reward you will get and the more effective it will be. So vocalize it, say it in a loud voice, and sometimes even if you have a dua memorized, but if you have a book and you can read it, then open the book and read it, because that will now bring your eyes also into the picture, and it can help you focus, and it can give you a greater power to that dua. Of course, it's a mixed bag if you're using your phone, because the phone, yes, it's in front of your eyes, but there's also other things that might pop up and become distracting. Now, when you are doing the dua, all of these things that we're talking about, they are for us to be able to be attentive. So try to focus and think about what we are saying. Don't read a dua rapidly, unless you're trying to memorize it or review it. But when you're reciting it, when it comes to dua, when it comes to dhikr, better to be thoughtful and attentive and divide up a dua. You don't have to do dua al-nudba entirely in one sitting. Do part of the dua, but with attentiveness. And that is better than to do the entire dua, but kind of in a rush and without attentiveness. Another thing that we learn from Ahlul Bayt is to gather together and to do dua as a group. There is a hadith from our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi salam, that if 40 people gather together to do dua, then Allah does not refuse that dua. Now, this is for any haja that you may have. If there is a communal need or even an individual need, gather 40 people to pray with you and for you. But of course, the most important haja or need that we will have is that which has the broadest benefit. And so the faraj of Ahlul Bayt, the faraj of Imam Mahdi, that is not just one of our hajat, but the most important haja. But this emphasis on group prayer, it's not exclusive to one type of prayer. Anything that you need to ask from Allah, and even more so the more important du'as, you can do it as a group. And the hadith says that if you don't have 40 people, then get 4 people and do the prayer 10 times. You have a group, and the prayer is repeated 40 times. And if you don't even have 4 people, then just do it yourself 40 times. So the group is important, but the repetition is also important. And if you can't get that number, then you can repeat it without that full number. Now, when it comes to dua, there are ways to increase the effectiveness of the dua. It doesn't dilute your prayer to make that prayer on behalf of others, but rather it increases the potency, the power, and the effectiveness. So if I just recite, say, a dua on my own behalf, then that's one dua. But if I say, I am reciting this dua on behalf of my parents, well, now it is 3 du'as, myself and my parents. And if I add other believers, and if I add even the ma'sumin, then it is increasing the power of the dua, because the power of the dua comes in the intention. It is an act of the soul and the tongue. It's not an act of the hands. But that is what makes an action what it is. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ means that it is that intention which underlies the act, that is the essence of the act. So you can do a very big thing, but if you don't have a good intention, it's not a big thing. And you can do something seemingly insignificant, but if it has a true divine intention, then it is a great deed. That is because of the intention and not because of the outward action. If we understand that, it makes sense that the more people I include in my intention, the more expansive and the more profound my intention is, then the greater good deed it is. So now it's not one dua, but it is many du'as that are being recited by one person at one time. And then another part of this we can add is that you can also dedicate the reward of that dua to a ma'soom. So now you've done an act on behalf of somebody, and that act has a reward. You dedicate the reward to somebody. So you did one thing, but because of those associations and that intention, it's now a very different act than it was before. So what I mean by that is, for example, I'm going to recite dua Humayd, but I'm doing it on behalf of my parents as well as myself. And it doesn't matter whether they are alive or they are deceased. And then once I finish the dua, I say that I want to dedicate the thawab of this dua to the Imam of my time. So now you've done several good deeds with the same amount of effort and time that it just would have taken you to recite the dua by itself. And once we have learned from, refined our thoughts with the words of Ahlul Bayt, then it is important to also pray to the Imam, to pray for the Imams, to pray to Allah in our own words. So with an intimate kind of a conversation in your own language, in your own words, but try to use that inspiration that we have received from the guidance of Ahlul Bayt. All right, before we move on, we can give a few moments for questions. Go ahead.
So if we make the intention of including others in our own du'as, isn't that, and we want to get more blessings for it, isn't that kind of like a business transaction?
Is it a kind of a business transaction? It is a business transaction, but the Quran describes faith as a business transaction. So that transaction is a way for us to appreciate the value of our time, our actions, our life. And Allah wants us to appreciate the value of what He has given us. So we should not, yes, the world is nothing in comparison to the hereafter. But this world is the way in which that you can earn salvation and reward in the hereafter. So there's some people who are slaves to wealth. They'll cut every corner, lie, cheat, steal, break family ties to get rich. They'll steal from their own family, right? That's not good. But then, if you realize that the world is not worth that, you run the risk of saying that this world is worthless, and so who cares about money? Right? No, you should care about money, and you should use that money for the sake of Allah. And so you need to enter into that business transaction to be able to value what God has given you, the merchandise that He has put in your care and entrusted to you, and told you that I want you to use it, to sell it, so that you can gain the greatest profit. The sincerity comes when you realize that the merchandise that you're selling, that business transaction that you are engaging in, is really Allah's property. It's not your property. So be a good steward. And even if you are the owner's agent and not the owner, get the greatest profit for your owner that you can, for your client in this case, which is Allah, that you can. Any other questions? Go ahead.
I think in a previous class you mentioned how we should always begin our own du'as with the glorification of Allah. Is that part of making du'as that Ahlul told us how to make those du'as and then make du'as for ourselves after that?
Yeah, so should we start with glorification of Allah? Almost every dua that we have from Ahlul Bayt, it will begin with glorification of Allah. And then, so there's general glorification of Allah, which is sometimes called hamd. Then there is a phase which is known as thana. Some scholars have said that the difference between hamd and thana, they're both praise. But one is the general glorification of Allah for His majesty, and then there is the specific praise for what God has done to you. You kind of move from the universal to the specific, then you come to yourself and you ask forgiveness, you seek God's mercy and forgiveness, and then you come to your hajat and you ask Allah for what it is that you want. So many of the du'as that we have received, they kind of go in this order, either very specifically or in general, with some stages sometimes being longer or shorter. So you'll see that in Dua Kumail, for example. You'll see that in Dua al-Iftitah, for example. You'll see that in many other du'as. Sometimes if it's not found in a du'a, that might be because that du'a is not complete. So it's narrated, as part of a longer session or a longer prayer that may have been recited. But in general, all of the du'as, or most of the du'as that we have received from Ahlul Bayt, they will follow that progression. Sure. Brother Ali Rahmat, go ahead.
Yeah, you said without piety, our actions are not accepted. What what level of piety are we talking about? Because at some point, most of us are in negligence with something we did in disobedience to Allah.
Yeah, all of us are in negligence. In fact, acknowledging that negligence is part of piety. So piety means humility and fear of God. So if we are humble before God, we recognize our negligence, and we have fear of God, then God does not expect us to be ma'soom. He is our creator. He knows all of the weaknesses that we have within our creation, the physical weaknesses and the spiritual and emotional strengths and weaknesses. So piety is an orientation to God, a humility before God, a fear of God. And it is that will to avoid sinning, and if we commit a sin, to feel profound regret and disgust, and to repent and to commit to change. So it's not that we will not sin, but if and when we do, then it's not something that we take for granted. Yeah? What do you expect? This is the society that I live in. This is what I'm going, I'm going to do, and I have no apologies and no regrets. So that's what taqwa requires. And it is something that has gradations. So the minimum requirement is that we have fear of God and we repent when we commit sins. We commit not to do it again, even if we end up doing it again. But then from there, as we grow stronger in piety, we will be able to much more effectively avoid sin, not just in actions, but even in inclination, even in intention. And those gradations of piety bring us closer and closer to Allah. We're good to proceed? So let's move on to discuss the qualities, the virtues, those aspects of the being of Imam Mahdi which cause us to want to pray for him. It's one thing to say that we should pray for him, and when, and how. But it's another thing for us to understand the factors that increase our desire to pray for the Imam. And there's many things that we can talk about here, but we'll summarize in a few areas. One is those things that are the benefits that we receive, the effects of the existence of Imam Mahdi, the existential grace that we get through Imam Mahdi. One is those attributes that characterize his person, his personal traits. The elevation of his personality and his existence. Another is his akhlaq, or his character in interacting with others. Just like Prophet and our Imams, all of them were at the highest level of moral character in their interactions with others. They were all on ala khuluqin azim, in the highest level of etiquette. Imam Mahdi has that same elevation of of etiquette and moral traits. Then there is the hardship, the privation of ghaiba. The Imam is in a period of ghaiba, and similar to our previous Imams, when they suffered imprisonment or house arrest or hardship, then that wasn't because of their own personal reasons. It was because of their leadership, their guidance, their service, their sacrifice for humanity that they were oppressed. And the ghaiba of the Imam of our time, his occultation, is a much more severe test than house arrest or than imprisonment. Not to lessen the severity of the suffering of our previous Imams, but this is a very different, a very great, and a very long test in terms of its duration. And so the hardship of the ghaiba. Imagine, for example, if we were in the time of Imam Musa Kadhim alayhi salam, we're going to remember his martyrdom towards the end of this month of Rajab. And we found out that our Imam has just been arrested by Harun al-Rashid. So what would you do? And if even that example is a little bit too far-fetched, imagine that your parent or your child was arrested. What would you do? Right, so that's whatever is a visceral example that you can feel, and then imagine how much more important it is to pray when the person is even closer to your heart, even more important for your existence than your child or your parent or your spouse or whoever else you love. And if your Imam were imprisoned, then imagine that it's not a short duration or a minor kind of a test, but an even greater test. The ghaiba is not imprisonment, it's not house arrest, but it is an even more severe test and difficulty. And then another reason to pray for Imam Mahdi is all of the goodness that will come in the era of the dhuhur. Dhuhur means the appearance or the reappearance, as we would say in English, of the Imam, the manifestation of the Imam. So the illumination in terms of guidance, the spread of justice, social justice, economic justice, political justice, and all other forms of justice. So all of the grace that will come through the appearance of the Imam, that is another reason for us to fervently pray for our Imam, because he is the source for that goodness to come. Right? It's when the Imam comes that all of those good things that Allah has promised will come into existence. So let's begin with the being of the Imam. Remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala khalaqa as-samawati wal-arda bil-haqq. The physical world exists, but its existence is for the sake of haqq. So truth is the purpose for the existence of the physical world. And that haqq is manifested throughout human history through prophets and the revelation given to the prophets. That is why, in fact, we have been given an intellect. It is so that we can recognize and then follow the prophets and their message. Our intellect, it points us to the oneness of God. But the refinement of our understanding of Tawheed, it comes through the teachings of the Prophet, the teachings of the Quran, the teachings of the Imams, which are the explanation of the verses of Quran. if we remember that the physical world exists for the sake of truth, and truth is manifested through the teachings of the Prophet and the Imams, then we can see the relationship of the Imam with regard to the physical world. You have to flip the way we normally see things. We think of the physical world as real, and that which is unseen as a little less real. Maybe some of us, we kind of think that this world is very real, and subconsciously we think akhirah is like a dream, a little fuzzy. But the reality is, akhirah is the manifestation of haqq, the unveiled depth of creation, where truth and the moral force of the universe will not be shielded because of the weaknesses of the material world. In this world, you can be a very beautiful, attractive person with bad character. And you can be an unattractive person with good character. That's just the nature of the material world. But in the akhirah, the haqq will not be veiled and shielded. Right? So the beautiful in the akhirah will be the people whose character is beautiful. And not the people who had good lotions and plastic surgeons. And the people who will be unattractive are the people who had bad character, not the people who had to do backbreaking work in a coal mine or in the fields, and therefore they have a rough complexion and kind of difficult features. It's the character. And that haqq is taught and manifested by the Prophet and by the Imams. So remember that. That's more real. The existence of the Imam and his role is central for the purpose of creation to be fulfilled. And whatever takes place in the physical world, it is for guidance. And the manifestation of guidance is the ma'soom. So whatever takes place in this physical world, the intermediary of that is the ma'soom. I hope the logic is important. I'm pausing at it because it's sometimes not counterintuitive, but it is something that there's two kinds of confusion. One is the confusion of carelessness, that I can feel this, so it's real, but I don't feel reward and punishment, so I think that maybe it's going to happen, maybe it's not going to happen. That's one kind of confusion that comes from negligence. There's another confusion that sometimes people think this is against Tawheed. But it's no more against Tawheed to say that what happens in the physical world is through the Imam than to say that guidance is through the Prophet. Is it against Tawheed to say that the Prophet is the one who is the intermediary of God's guidance? No. God is the guide, but the Quran, the Sharia, everything, it came through the Prophet. So he's a wasita, an intermediary. Does that contradict Tawheed? No. In fact, it is what solidifies Tawheed, because you can't have a perfect Tawheed except through the Prophet. So same thing is true for everything else in the physical world. Your health, your income, your family, everything good that you have, it comes through the Imam. That's not contradicting Tawheed any more than guidance coming through the Prophet is contradicting Tawheed. That's the other confusion, that people have the wrong idea of Tawheed. Tawheed means that Allah is the source of everything. But then He created means for us to be guided. He created means for us to receive His favor. When we are infants, our parents are a means. They are not our Lord and Sustainer. God is, but it comes through them. And throughout our existence, the Prophet and the Imams, they are a means. Created by God, placed by God, honored by God. So it's a reflection of, a reminder of Tawheed, not a contradiction to Tawheed, but they are the intermediate. That's the essence of that existential role of Imam Mahdi as the Imam of our time, and all of the Imams speaking in general. It is through him that we receive sustenance. It is through his existence that heaven and earth exist. This is a phrase from Dua al-Adila. Some of you may be familiar with Dua al-Adila. بِيُمْنِهِ رُزِقَ الْوَرَاءُ وَبِوُجُوْتِهِ ثَبَتَتِ الْأَرْضُ وَالسَّمَاءُ. Dua al-Adila is generally not considered to be a dua narrated from the Imams directly, but it follows that principle that I mentioned earlier, that it is the composition of one of our ulama, we don't know exactly who, but all of the themes, they are taken from ayat of Quran and from ahadith. And this theme also is there from the Imams. For example, in a hadith of Imam Zain al-Abidin, he speaks to Abu Hamza al-Thumali, who was, as you may be familiar, a very close companion of several of our Imams, Imam Zain al-Abidin being the first of the Imams that he was a companion of. And Abu Hamza al-Thumali was the one that Imam Zain al-Abidin taught the dua known as Dua Abi Hamza al-Thumali too. So it's not really the dua of Abu Hamza al-Thumali, it's the dua of Imam Zain al-Abidin taught to Abu Hamza al-Thumali. So because he was a special person, the Imam said that I want you to be awake at sahar time. Because people of special piety, they have a higher obligation not to just kind of live the way that I might live, which is to sleep through the night, but they would be awake at those special times of prayer. And the Imam says the reason for that is إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَقْسِمُ or يُقَسِّمُ فِي ذَلِكَ الْوَقْتِ أَرْزَاقَ الْعِبَادِ. It is at that time of sahar that Allah distributes the rizq of the servants. That's done during the time of sahar. وَعَلَى أَيْدِينَا يُجْرِيهَا. And it is through our hands that Allah distributes it. So it is Allah who is the sustainer, the Rabb, the Raziq, but it is at the hands of the Imams that sustenance is distributed. So that phrase that we find in Dua al-Adila and other du'as, even if it is not the exact word of an Imam, it is derived from this hadith and many, many other ahadith and ziyarat that have come from the Imams. So another one of the existential benefits that we receive from the Imam is to remember the purpose of our creation. The purpose of our creation is for us to worship. وَخَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسِ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. Humanity and jinn were created to worship God. Or in Surah Hud, then the Quran tells us that people will continue to differ. لَا يَزَالُونَ مُخْتَلِفِينَ. They will always have differences. They will always have disputes. People, by our very nature, we are argumentative. But the way that Allah removes us from that argumentativeness or from that being lost in just discussion and debate, إِلَّا مَنْ رَحِمَ رَبُّكَ, except the ones who are shown mercy by Allah. وَلِذَلِكَ خَلَقَهُمْ. And that is why God has created them. There are different tafsir as to what لِذَلِكَ refers to. One of them is that God created people for this mercy. So people will have disputes, except those whom God has shown mercy. And it is for that mercy that God has created people. This is one of the interpretations of the source of Quran, Surah Hud, verse 119. So that mercy, which saves a person from endless disputation and confusion, is the ibadah that God has created us for, which is a connection to the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt. So don't think of these as separate themes that, well, Allah created us liya'budun, or Allah created us lidhalika, which is for His mercy. Your ibadah and the means of receiving that mercy is your worshipping Allah through dedication to the path of the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt. Your service to Imam Mahdi is your worship of Allah. And that is the source of God's mercy, which takes you out of that darkness of confusion. There's a hadith narrated from our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam. And this hadith is from Imam Hussein alayhi salam, that Imam Hussein said to his companions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ma khalaqa al-ibad illa liya'rifu. Allah didn't create people except for them to have knowledge of God. Allah didn't create them for ignorance. وَلِذَلِكَ خَلَقَهُمْ. He created them for cognizance, for knowledge. Because when they know God, they will worship Him. And when they worship Him, then they will be free of need of worshiping anyone but God. Now, wealth and power and the passions of the stomach or the body, they're not going to be what we serve and we worship once you taste the beauty of worshiping Allah. So a person said to Imam Hussein alayhi salam that what is knowledge of God? Yabna Rasulullah, bi'abi anta wa ummi, may my parents be ransom for you. فَمَا مَعْرِفَةُ اللَّهِ. What is this knowledge of God? And Imam Hussein is reported to have said, قال معرفة أهل كل زمان إمامهم الذي يجب عليهم طاعته. It is the knowledge by the people of every era of the Imam that it is obligatory for them to follow. So they're not two separate things. When you recognize the Imam, then you recognize God. Can you recognize God without the Imam? It will be a deficient recognition. Okay, so if you don't recognize the Prophet, it's not just that you don't recognize the Prophet, but you haven't really recognized God, because God is the one who in His mercy and in His grace sent the Prophet. You have a deficient recognition of God if you don't recognize the Prophet. And you have a deficient recognition of the Prophet if you don't recognize the continuity of his mission through the Imam. Ma'rifatu ahli kulli zaman imamahum alladhi yajibu alayhim ta'atu. So if you don't recognize every Imam, then there is a deficiency in your recognition of the message of the Prophet and its continuity, and therefore in your recognition of God. It doesn't make you kafir, but it means that your ma'rifah is lacking. Now moving forward, because Ahlul Bayt are the means by which Allah provides guidance and grace and even material bounties to humanity, we sometimes see that they are referred to as Yadullah. or wajhullah. And that should not be seen as an anthropomorphic usage. Anthropomorphic meaning that some people say that, well, are you trying to bring God down to a human type of form? No, when those terms are used in the Quran, they have a figurative meaning because in Arabic, yad is used for a favor or for a grace. So, for example, in Arabic, if they say ayadik, that refers to, literally it means your hands. But what it means is your favors. I will not forget your favors that you have shown me. So, yadullah, in a figurative sense, can refer to the favors of God. A hadith have also told us that it is referring to Ahlul Bayt, because they are the means by which those favors of God reach people. So it's not anthropomorphic. It's not saying that Imam Ali alayhi salam is, or any of our other Imams, is the face of God as if God has a body, or the hand of God as if God has a physical hand. But rather it is the hand of God in the sense that God has favors that He has shown us. And the means by which, the hand by which we receive those favors is the hand of our Imam. Now, all of those favors, they exist in the concealment of our Imam during his ghaibah. But they will exist in their fullest and their most beautiful and powerful fashion upon the appearance of the Imam. So we have to remember both aspects. That even when the Imam is not physically present with us, it is through him that we receive divine favors. Out of sight should not mean out of mind. But don't think that that is all that the Imam represents. Sometimes we kind of have this tendency to think a certain situation is normal, and that becomes our baseline, and that becomes our horizon as well. Remember that there is much more that the Imam is able to do, and that he will do when Allah grants him the permission to publicly start his mission. So remembering what he does now, and the fact that we get the blessings of Allah through the Imam, should not make us forget that this is just a drop in the ocean of the grace, the guidance, the benefit that comes from somebody appointed by God to a position of leadership and guidance. And we should always aspire to, pray for, think about what it is that the Imam will bring. Allahumma inna narghabu ilayka fi dawlatin karimatin tu'izzu biha al-Islam wa ahla wa tudhillu biha al-nifaqa wa ahla. Oh Allah, we have a fervent hope that we will see that just society in which faith and the people of faith will be honored, and hypocrisy and the people of hypocrisy will finally be brought down from that fake honor and that pedestal that they have in a corrupt society. So when you look at society, you see the small good that exists. So don't let that be your baseline and think that all that's possible is that, well, maybe we can reduce poverty a little bit and we can kind of help at the margins. No, society is capable of a great elevation, but that dawla karima needs to be at the hands of a ma'soom. In order to pray and to value it, you need to believe in your mind that that is real, that that promise has been made by God, and that that the Imam will fulfill that promise. Right, before we move on, we can take another pause for questions. Any questions on the material covered so far? If there's any questions online, please let me know as well. Go ahead.
I just have a question about the phrasing, like my parents do write them. I know I see that repeated in different du'as and things, and I just was wondering if there's a meaning to it and why the choice of parents rather than self and children, anything like that.
I mean, today's society, a lot of times people value their children more than their parents, but and that's a cultural corruption that we have in our time. But this phrase comes from a culture where the most honorable thing that you have, the most valuable thing that you have is your parents. So, we do have a hadith where the phrase is binafsi anta and du'as. May I be ransom for you. But then what if there's something even more valuable than yourself? Again, in our culture, maybe the self is kind of the most valuable thing that people can imagine, but there are things that are more valuable than the self, and that includes our children, it includes our parents. The most honored thing, valuable thing that we have in traditional cultures influenced by the value system of Islam is our parents. So that's why that's mentioned. That if my parents pale in comparison to the ma'soom, then of course my property pales in comparison to the ma'soom. Of course myself and my children and everything else pales in comparison to the ma'soom. Because the obligation of myself and my children and others is to serve and to honor and to protect their elders, their parents, their grandparents, my parents. So that value system is what informs these words. And the message really, if you want to generalize it and universalize it, is the most valuable thing that I have pales in comparison to you. May everything be ransomed for you, the most precious, let alone the least precious. You know how sometimes people, they have like a recently remodeled house, and then guests come and they bring their out of control children, and some people are very sensitive that, oh my God, they're messing up, my carpet, they're messing up my new sofa, they're messing up my. But then their own kids or their own grandchildren come, oh no, let them play. That's a human kind of a difference that we make between that which we value. We're willing to sacrifice things. But if I don't have a relationship, then that same antic now seems out of control rather than cute. And the idea that we want to gradually inculcate into our minds is that not just my carpet or my sofa or my possessions or my car, but even my own soul. Not just my own soul, but even those that are more valuable to me than my soul. They are meant to be offered to the ma'soom and not seen as in competition or more valuable than the ma'soom.
I think there was a question online, but the word in hand. Also, I wanted to add some of the du'as we have from
wa ahli wa mali, so we do have the others as well. The most common that you will see is bi-abi anta wa ummi or bi-nafsi anta. And then we do have du'as and ziyarat that mention also my property, my children, and everything be ransomed for you. It's just a matter of how expressive and detailed the phrasing of that dua might be.
I guess the question was, you kind of have ownership of yourself, you kind of have like ownership of your children. You don't have that.
No, it's not saying that I am going to ransom my parents. necessarily that you know that I'm going to sell somebody into slavery, but it's a statement of priority. So if my parents are there and my grandparents are there, I'm going to show honor to my parents, but I'm going to show greater honor to my grandparents, right? And if my parents and my grandparents and the Prophet is there, then I will show honor to my parents and I will show honor to my grandparents, but I will show greater honor to the Prophet. So what I'm saying here is not that I'm going to claim ownership, but rather that I am affirming that greater right of the Ma'sum, because it's not always natural for us or visceral for us to feel that. So just to go back to that example in the house, right, if I am a good host, then I need to be just as considerate to other people's kids and their need to play and make a mess as I am to my own kids. For my own kids, it might be easier. But for somebody else, I might need to remind myself. I might need to vocalize it in order for it to enter into my character. So this is a vocalization, a reminder that whatever honor my parents have, the Imams have even greater. And this is not by any means, some might also have that question that is this kind of demeaning or dishonorable to your parents. And it's not by any means a putting down of the honor of your parents. It's an elevation of the rank of the Imams. It was understood in that culture how honorable parents were. And so when you say that somebody is even more valuable, then it's an elevation. It's kind of like, today we say somebody is worse than Hitler, right? Now, that's not an actual evaluation of what Hitler did or how bad he was, right? That's kind of just a stand-in for the worst possible person that can be imagined. And so it's sort of a reference point for evil. And similarly, the most honorable thing that you had would be your parents, and this is a reference point for greater honor in the opposite direction, of course. Good to go? All right. Now, another benefit that we have from the Imams is that they are a source of preventing harm and alleviating distress. We tend to think of what prevents harm or alleviates distress in terms of what we have access to, the friend I can call, right? The person who is alive and available to me. But in reality, harm, calamities, distress, bala, that is averted not just by those physical means where I can call you and you can come and help me, but by spiritual means. And before we come to the Imam, even much closer at hand, if a friend prays for you, that can protect you from a calamity that was about to come. Your parents, and especially your mom, and her prayers are a real source of protection and aversion of calamities. Not because she's, physically strong and she's going to come and remove that calamity, but because of the power of prayer. Now, if that's true of a believer, if that's true of your parents, if that's true in particular of your mother, then much more so of the Imam. So the Imam is the source for protection from calamities, from tribulations that we might otherwise be subjected to. And because of that rank of the Imam, even those who are close to the Imam, they also can be a source of protection from these tribulations. Because they are part of institution that comes about through the Imam. The Imam is the focal point, but then he is the source of guidance. And teaching, so the ulama, the awliya or the sulaha, those pious people who serve the Imam, they are part of an institution, a community that comes with the Imam at its head and as its focal point. So the Imam and even those associated with the Imam, they can be a source of the removal of bala. But the most important part is the Imam himself. And so that is why, that's one reason to pray for him. Because going back to that transaction that you mentioned earlier, you are also, by praying for the Imam, you are praying for the protection of yourself. And not just yourself, but for your loved ones and for all of humanity. And there's a number of ahadith that talk about how the fact that some people study Islam removes calamities from everybody else, or worship Allah, or read the Quran, perform prayers. The fact that some people honor that divine commandment is a source of grace and blessings, even for those who are somewhat careless or negligent. Now, another of the effects or the benefits that we get from the Imam is what has been compared in hadith to the sun behind the clouds. When asked, how do you benefit from the Imam when he's in occultation? For a community that was used to having the Imam present, sometimes seeing what's visible blinds you to all of the requirements that are not visible for that visible blessing to come. Sometimes you appreciate, a loved one when they are not available to do things that they might do, and you don't even realize how much they are doing because it's routine. Even if you're not taking it for granted, but it's routine. So there was a routine role, in a sense, or a relationship that the Shia had with the Imams in their presence. And in the ghaiba, it brought into greater relief some of the roles of the Imam that existed even before the ghaiba, but that people were not as attentive to because the relationship was kind of a routinized relationship. I go, I ask questions, I get answers from the Imam. So one way to think of this is that if you come in a hot climate, the sun behind the cloud is actually sometimes more beneficial than the sun directly shining down on you. Don't think of this as if you're living in London and you're starved for the sight of the sun, according to the stereotype at least. But think of it as if you're in Mecca, right? When the sun is shining down on you, the fact that it's hot and it's bright blinds you. You need it, it's still good for you, but you have to kind of go in the house and wait until it's cooler. But if the sun is there behind the clouds, you're getting the heat, you're getting the light, you're getting the benefit, and you're also able to go about your life. Now, that's not the only aspect of understanding this hadith. My point is simply to say that don't think that this analogy of the sun behind the clouds is saying that, well, yeah, the sun behind the clouds is not as good as the sun that you can see, but you're still getting some benefit, or you're getting less benefit. No, in some ways, you might be getting more benefit. Or what we should say more accurately, more precisely, is that you're getting a different benefit. Right? Because there are some things that you access when the sun is directly there that you can't get indirectly. Maybe your solar panels are going to be more effective. And there's some things that you can get when the sun is not directly visible than when it is visible. But that benefit that we get from the Imam in occultation, it includes the removal of tribulations. It includes guidance. It's just that the guidance will be directed by the Imam, but it will not always be explicit and easily attributable to the Imam. So in some cases, it might be the circumstances that the Imam, as the leader of society and of his followers in particular, he places in our life. Allow us to experience or hear or see or read something that provides us guidance. But that's not a coincidence. There is a chain through which that guidance comes. And the head of that chain is the Imam. Right? So the benefits of the Imam are the illumination that comes. If it's a cloudy day in the summer, then all of the light and the illumination that you're getting is still coming from the sun. But you can't see the sun, you just see the lights everywhere. And that's how the guidance of the Imam might work for many people in the absence. Because you're not seeing it, you might not realize that it's coming from the sun, but it is. It's not any other source of heat or any other source of light. And then there are special rewards that come in the time of the ghaiba. According to a hadith that's narrated from Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi salam from one of his companions, Ammar al-Sabati. Sabat is a region in Iraq. He asks the Imam, which is greater? To worship Allah in this period of secrecy. Now, this is not specific to the ghaiba, but the ghaiba is similar to the period in which our Imams were under house arrest, in that you kind of have to conceal your faith, or you're not able to publicly proclaim all aspects of your faith and implement them. Or is it better to pray in the time when the Imam will reappear, establish justice, in public without any kind of fear, without any kind of concealment? And the Imam gave a very beautiful example. The Imam says that, Ya Ammar, as-sadaqatu fis-sirr, wallahi afdalu min as-sadaqati fil-alaniya. When you give charity in secret, that is greater than giving charity in public. And so when you are in the state of the Imam not having his full authority, yes, you're yearning and you're longing for the promise to be fulfilled, but this state has hardship and it has difficulty, whether it be the ghaiba that we are in now or the oppression that existed in the time of Ammar al-Sabati and Imam Ja'far Sadiq. And that has a greater reward. Imam compares it to charity in secret. Now you might wonder, then why should we yearn for the Imam's appearance if the ibadah is in secret? That's also found, it's answered in other ahadith. And our purpose is not just to get the maximum reward for our ibadah. It is to see the maximum benefit to humanity, for the Imams to be in their proper place and in their proper rank that Allah has appointed them towards. Right? So, just to give a kind of imperfect example, if society has extreme poverty, then your charity is going to go a lot further. If there's no extreme poverty, right, we have universal healthcare, universal housing. So now if you want to do charity, what are you going to do? Give a poor person an extra TV? So your charity has more thawab, let's say. It's an imperfect example, but I hope it makes sense. When there's extreme poverty, because now you're saving a person from death to life. You're taking them from sleeping in the shivering cold to sleeping, with a small shelter. Maybe that has more thawab. But would you rather live in a society where there's extreme poverty so you can get that thawab? Or would you rather live in a society where nobody is going to sleep hungry, where nobody is unable to access healthcare, where nobody is homeless? Obviously, if you're a decent human being, you'd want to live in that society. So you do yearn, but this hadith also gives you a great deal of uh, warmth that there is a wisdom, a reward, a benefit for the period of hardship. So now moving on, what about when the Imam appears? Well, when the Imam appears, then the blessings are beyond our ability to really imagine. The protection from calamity will be more universal and greater. The most important thing is that the illumination of Islam will spread, and every evil, every injustice, every ignorance will be cleared away. So the promise that we have for the appearance of the Imam, we don't know if we're going to be alive to witness it. Inshallah, we will be given that honor by Allah, but it's important for us to remember it and to bring it into our mind and heart, because that makes our yearning for the Imam even greater. Imagine if somebody describes for you a very beautiful place to go, and then you actually see like a video or a picture in great clarity, so you become more hopeful and even more excited to witness that great place. So the more vivid it is, the more your prayer will be fervent. According to a hadith, there's a general benefit that will come to all of humanity because justice will be universal. There is a special benefit that will come to the believers who serve and follow the Imam, whether they are alive or dead. There is a hadith from our sixth Imam that in the explanation of Surah Al-Rum, يَوْمَ إِذٍ يَفْرَحُ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ, on that day the believers will be happy. That's referring not just to the triumph of Rome over Persia in history, but that is referring to the triumph of truth over falsehood at the end of history at the hands of Imam Mahdi alayhi salam. And at that time, the believers will be happy, those who are alive because they were witnessing it, but even those who are fi quburihim, in their graves, they also will receive that happiness of the appearance of the Imam. So if somebody dies, don't think that they are deprived, because their soul is not dead. And if they were faithful to Ahlul Bayt, then even in that grave, some of them will come back to life in Raj'ah, which is one of the teachings of Ahlul Bayt. But even those who will not, even in their grave, they will have the warmth and the gladness of the appearance of the Imam. All right, moving on. Another of the benefits of the Imam, and this is one reason why we would be motivated to follow him, to develop a relationship with him, is that your prayers and deeds are only accepted through wilayah. And this is something that's kind of confusing to people. That, somebody who doesn't believe in the Imams, they do good deeds, it's not accepted. But the principle should not be far-fetched or difficult to understand, because it's a general principle. The Quran tells us, فَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ خَيْرًا يَرَهُ وَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ شَرًّا يَرَهُ. So if you do an atom's worth of good, you will see it. If you do an atom's worth of evil, you will see it. Yet the Quran also tells us, وَمَنْ يَبْتَغِ غَيْرَ الْإِسْلَامِ دِينًا فَلَنْ يُقْبَلَ مِنْهُ وَهُوَ فِي الْآخِرَةِ مِنَ الْخَاسِرِينَ. Whoever seeks a religion other than submission, Islam, it will not be accepted from him. So any good that you do, you will see it. But there's a condition. And that condition is that you have to accept Islam as a deen, submission as your faith. So similarly, your good deeds, they require submission not just to God, but also to His Prophet. Not just to His Prophet, but to the one that was appointed to leadership and imamate by the Prophet. Right? Saying that nothing but Islam will be accepted does not contradict that you will see, everybody will see their good and bad deeds. Because that is a condition for good deeds to be accepted. If a person doesn't have that, then Allah will reward them in this world. He will give them whatever reward they are due, but they don't have the right to demand reward in the hereafter if they didn't believe in God, believe in the hereafter, or accept the teachings that God had obligated them to accept. So wilaya is an essential requirement for the acceptance of our actions. And if our actions are accepted, that means that we will be forgiven by Allah and taken to paradise. Because Allah doesn't accept actions and then say, but I'm not going to send you to paradise, I'm going to punish you. So if Allah accepts the deeds, that means that He has accepted the person into paradise. So based on that principle, our good deeds are accepted through our wilaya of Ahlul Bayt. And we find that reflected in du'as. For example, in du'a an-nudba, وَاجْعَلْ صَلَاتَنَا بِهِ مَقْبُولَ وَذُنُوبَنَا بِهِ مَغْفُورَ وَدُعَاءَنَا بِهِ مُسْتَجَابَ. Make our prayer accepted through Imam Mahdi, our sins forgiven through him, our supplication answered through him. Now, before we conclude, just one other area that brings us closer to Imam Mahdi, the personal traits, the personality, the being of Imam Mahdi and his attributes. One is that he is the heir of Prophet Muhammad. So if you love Prophet Muhammad, one of the ways that you express that love is by praying for, by loving his heir. Many parents have experienced this. If somebody is really kind to your children, then you automatically have a love for that person. You might not know anything else about them. You might not see, they might not have done nothing for you. Sometimes even just the fact that your children take to somebody, they kind of enjoy their presence, even if you haven't seen why your child is so friendly, but just the fact that your child is comfortable with somebody, it kind of brings you closer to them. So Imam Mahdi is not just the child of the Prophet, but he is the heir. He is the manifestation of the Prophet's guidance and message in our time. And so your love for the Prophet is expressed in your love for Imam Mahdi. There is a hadith that tells us, this is narrated by Shaykh Saduq, that 4 groups of people will be given the Prophet's intercession on the Day of Judgment. Those who help one of the descendants of the Prophet, those who fulfill one of their needs when they are in need, those who love them with their heart, those who love them with their speech, with words, those who removes them from harm. That's for any descendant of the Prophet. And of course, if that is the benefit that is received by somebody who helps or loves or fulfills the need or removes harm from any descendant of the Prophet, then the key exemplar of Ahlul Bayt, or the descendants of the Prophet in our time, is the Imam. In Islamic culture, Sunni and Shia, you will sometimes see people, I want to do a good deed for a Sayyid. And it's an expression of my love for the Prophet. And that's good. It's a good culture. But don't lose the forest for the trees. The most important instance and Sayyid that you want to express your love for and serve is the Imam of your time, the Imam of every time. And then finally, looking at the Imam, hadith tell us that when the Quran speaks of the light that came with Prophet Muhammad, some people, they might think that this is referring to the Quran. So in Surah At-Taghabun, I believe, فَآمِنُوا بِاللَّهِ وَبِرَسُولِهِ فَآمِنُوا بِاللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ وَالنُّورِ الَّذِي أَنزَلْنَا. Believe in God and His Prophet and the light that we revealed. That light, which came with the Prophet, is his message. And that message is not just the Quran. It is the pairing of the Quran and Ahlul Bayt. That is the light that the Prophet brought. Or in Surah Al-A'raf, فَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا بِهِ وَعَزَّرُوهُ وَنَصَرُوهُ وَاتَّبَعُوا النُّورَ الَّذِي أُنزِلَ مَعَهُ. The believers are those, and the successful are those who are faithful to the Prophet and honor him and support him and follow the light that was revealed with him. And what do you follow? Yes, you follow the Quran, but you follow in practice the Imam. So that is the light. The Quran and Ahlul Bayt. And it is Ahlul Bayt that give the context and the meaning and the application of the Quran in our time. So according to Hadith, Ahlul Bayt are that light. And in this verse of Surah Al-Hadid, Allah tells us that if you are pious, if you believe in the Prophet, then first of all, Allah will give you a double measure of mercy. وَيَجْعَلْ لَكُمْ نُورًا تَمْشُونَ بِهِ. Allah will give you light that you will walk with. So the light that Allah revealed is the guidance of Ahlul Bayt. And Allah will give you that light for you to walk with, meaning you will have the guidance of Ahlul Bayt, alayhim as-salatu was-salam. So that concludes our session for today. We can have a few minutes for questions, and then inshallah we will wrap up. Do we have any questions online or in person? Go ahead.
So, you know how when you talked about the zuhur of the Imam, it sounds almost like, it would be a perfect world without injustice and, all of that. And so what is a better way to understand that without completing it with like the day of judgment?
What is a better way to
understand it, without confusing it?
So before the day of judgment, right? There's a hadith that explicitly says that if there was only one day left until the day of judgment, then Allah will extend that day until the Imam comes and fulfills this purpose. So this is the culmination of human history, the preparation for the day of judgment. And in fact, when it comes to Surah An-Naba, عَمَّا يَتَسَاءَلُونَ عَنِ النَّبَإِ الْعَظِيمِ. Well, if you look at many tafasir, not from Ahlul Bayt, then they will say, this is referring to the Day of Judgment. And if you look at the tafasir of Ahlul Bayt, it says it is referring to particular Imam Ali. He is An-Naba'ul Azim, the great news. But of course, Imam Ali was not an individual, he was an institution. That institution was imamat. That imamat leads to the culmination and the perfection of humanity and history, which is a precursor to Qiyamah. I want to say it in a general term so it doesn't only refer to one understanding of the relationship between the appearance of the Imam and Qiyamah, but in a general sense, this is the culmination of human history. And it is a prerequisite and a preparation for Qiyamah. So we have a period where Allah will reward and punish people based on their good and bad deeds. That is the Day of Judgment. You have a day of Raj'ah when Allah will take certain people who are very good or very bad and give them a worldly reward or punishment before the hereafter. That's not Qiyamah, but you can see a very clear relationship. Qiyamah is universal. Raj'ah is not universal, but there is reward and there is punishment. And the appearance of the Imam is also a day in which truth will become manifest, falsehood will become will be defeated, and it will be in stages. So there will still be enemies, there will be battles, there will be struggle in the time of the Imams, in the time of Imam Mahdi, and then in stages his message will spread, his mission will succeed and triumph. So you can see that there is also a relationship between the appearance of the Imam and Raj'ah and Qiyam. I don't want to say that they are the same thing, and I don't want to say that there is an equality, but there is a progression. And so when you look at Surah An-Naba, you can say that this great news, yeah, it might be referring to Qiyamah. And the events that lead up to Qiyamah. And therefore it could be referring to Imam Ali alayhi salam and his imamat as the establishment of the institution of imamat, which is going to bring humanity to its perfection and its culmination, which is going to complete the proof of Allah. Because if it hadn't been for the appearance of Imam Mahdi, and if it hadn't been for Raj'ah, then maybe people could have said, Allah, this was never possible. You gave us these teachings, but it was, you know, like sometimes you want to play a trick on somebody, so you give them a puzzle, but there's no solution for it. You're like, can you try to solve it? And they spend hours, and they're like, okay, I give up. And you're like, well, there was no solution, sorry. So people might say that. And so the institution of Imamat and the Imamat of Imam Ali and Raj'ah and Dhuhur of Imam Mahdi, all of these, they are the stages and aspects of the completion of God's proof. So on the Day of Judgment, all of us will say that, Allah, yes, we have no excuse, no alternative history that we could give you, no argument that you didn't guide us, or that you gave us an impossible task, or that we are justified in our failing.
Or like I was thinking that this is a limited world, imperfect just by nature, it could be inferior, it's not possible.
So there is a limitation to what this world is capable of, but whatever this world will not be akhirah. So Imam Mahdi's appearance and the triumph of truth and justice will be the culmination of this material world. So that's not going to be equivalent to Jannah. Right? This will be the perfection of what this world is capable of. And then this world will come to an end. And then the realm of akhirah, which is an entirely different reality, which is beyond our imagination and our comparison, with anything in this world, that will begin. So yes, it is limited, but whatever the possibility of this world is, it will be accomplished before the hereafter. Sure.
Brother Mazahar, if you can hear us, go ahead, please.
Assalamu alaikum, Sayyid.
Alaikum assalam.
So I just have a question on the point on life and sustenance, where you said that the Imam is the wasila. With the example you presented for guidance, it's a bit easier to understand because the concept is spiritual, right? Guidance is something spiritual, and then the Imam is the wasila, which is also something spiritual. when you look at sustenance, and I know that sustenance might cover a broad spectrum of things, but the very base one, are a rizq. In that particular concept, it's a physical thing. Would you would you be able to explain how wasila, which is more a spiritual concept, would be able to come into that
That's a
picture?
good question. But I think to be brief, the answer to that is that we are the ones who perceive a difference between what is spiritual and what is physical. But imagine human health. If I do evil and then I suffer psychological, emotional, and physical effects of that evil, you can't really separate. Okay, this is the physical effect of sinning. This is the emotional effect. This is the psychological effect. This is the spiritual effect. Because they are closely related. Your body and your soul are connected. So the reality is that the sustenance comes from spiritual sources. And that's why مَن يَتَّقِ اللَّهِ. So if a person has piety, then what does Allah do for you? يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا وَيَرْزُقْهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبُ. Allah will give you rizq. So sustenance is not physical, explicitly in the Quran. So you can't separate the two. Just like we perceive, space and time as being two completely different things, but then when you understand space and time as being different dimensions of a single reality, then you might conceive of it differently. And maybe there are other more advanced theories that will give different models and different conceptions of the relationship of physical realities in space and time, different from how we normally perceive it. So the same thing is true of sustenance. So the answer that I think helps us appreciate the reality better is to understand that guidance and sustenance are not separate. Guidance comes through material forms, the words that we hear, the books that we read, the environment that we find ourselves in, and it is a spiritual reality. And sustenance comes to us in physical form, but it is also intimately tied to our spiritual reality. Another example is when the Quran says, فَلْيَنْظُرِ الْإِنسَانُ إِلَىٰ طَعَامِهِ. Let a person look at his food. Is that physical food or spiritual food? Both. Because they're not separate. Second question?
Firdaus Rizvi, please.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.
Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to learn from you. I have a question. We understand that our imams are the manifestation of Allah's sifat, but sometimes people called Imam Ali as Raziq. Should we consider is like just this is the manifestation of Allah that they are calling him as Raziq? Because some people then blame us as mushrik.
Yeah, that's a good question. When it comes to the attributes of Allah, then we should start from the ways that Allah describes himself, and we should not depart from that framework. Similarly, when it comes to the imams, we should not depart from the framework that the imams have given us. So for example, for Allah, I could say that, well, a father is a protector and a source of guidance, and so God is our father. It's a beautiful image. Yes, Allah is more merciful to us than our mother, but Allah is not our mother. Allah is not our father. We are not all the children of God. We can't just make that up and say, well, it's a beautiful analogy, because it could have certain aspects of beauty in it, but it could also have certain harms in it, and Allah knows better. So, in no hadith or no dua or ziyarah have we been taught to say that Ahlul Bayt are Rabb or Raziq. Allah is the one who gives rizq. He is our Rabb. Yes, Ahlul Bayt are intermediaries and means and a source for us to receive that blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah has empowered Ahlul Bayt to fulfill certain needs of people, to grant their hajat, but there is a clear pointing of Ahlul Bayt to God. And all of what they do and what they are in creation is to manifest and to deepen our understanding of Tawheed, not to distract from Tawheed. So the words that we use should be derived from and inspired by, I'm not saying limited to. You can be poetic, you can express yourself, but it should be within the framework and the guidelines that were used by Allah to describe Himself, by Allah and by the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt to describe their role. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you.
We should conclude now with salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.